Please follow me. The little black girl told the biker as echoing footsteps grew louder in the parking tunnel. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of an overhead light and the faint echo of footsteps growing louder in the shadows. The flicker of a fluorescent bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows, making the place feel almost haunted. There, standing alone under a rusted light, a young girl emerged from the dark tunnel that led to the back exit. Her small frame trembled, and her tear-streaked face was barely visible as she ran toward a lone biker leaning against his motorcycle. The girl's eyes locked onto him, and with every step, her sobs grew louder. She was barely more than a child, no older than 8 or 9, but her fear was palpable. She rushed up to him, her hand reaching out as if to grab hold of a lifeline. "Please follow me," she gasped, her voice shaky. "They took my brother." The biker straightened up, instantly sensing something was wrong. His hardened exterior, honed from years of riding and surviving the streets, softened at the sight of the girl's distress. Without a second thought, he looked down at her, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Who took him?" he asked gently, though he already had a sinking feeling he knew the answer. The girl's eyes darted nervously to the darkness behind her, her body trembling in fear. "The men from the other side," she whispered, her words barely audible, but there was no mistaking the panic in her voice. The biker's gaze hardened. He had seen his share of trouble, but something about this felt different. He had to help. The girl's shaking hand tugged at his sleeve, urging him to follow her. "They won't stop until they get him," she cried. "Please, I'm scared. They might come after me too." He stood up, the weight of her words sinking in. Without another word, he swung his leg over his bike and started the engine. The deep rumble of the motorcycle broke the silence, and he watched as the girl slowly turned to lead him down the dimly lit path. As they moved further into the parking structure, the echo of their footsteps grew louder, and the hairs on the back of the biker's neck stood up. Something was definitely wrong. The girl led him to the corner of the lot, where a silver SUV was parked, its tinted windows barely visible in the darkness. The girl froze, her eyes wide with terror. The biker's mind raced. The SUV, the men. He had seen that kind of vehicle before. Only this time, the stakes were much higher. "Is that them?" the biker asked, his voice cold and steady. The girl nodded, unable to speak, her fear overwhelming her. He wasn't sure who these men were or what they wanted, but he was sure of one thing. They were not going to take this girl's brother. Not on his watch. With a deep breath, the biker revved his engine and signaled for the girl to climb on. "Hold on tight," he said, his voice firm. "We're going to get him back." The girl nodded, her small body stiff with fear as she climbed onto the back of the bike. They sped off, the roar of the engine cutting through the night, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, the girl allowed herself to believe that someone was going to help. As they raced down the dark street, the biker's mind was already working, planning the next move. The danger was real, and they had no time to waste. The girl's brother was out there somewhere, and he wasn't going to let anyone get away with taking him. Ignoring the danger, the biker pushed the throttle harder, the roar of the motorcycle deafening as the girl clung to him, her small hands gripping the leather of his jacket. The streets blurred around them, streetlights flashing by in quick succession as they raced through the night. Every turn they made brought them closer to the place where her brother was being held. They had no time to waste. The girl had told him everything she knew, but it wasn't much. She barely knew who the men were, only that they had been following her family for weeks. The bike shot through intersections, dodging traffic as the biker kept his focus. In his mind, a plan was forming. The men in the SUV couldn't be that far ahead, and he would not stop until the girl's brother was safe. The girl's grip tightened around his waist. She was scared, but there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes now. She wasn't alone anymore. They could do this. The city was just waking up, the streets quiet and empty at this hour. They approached a secluded part of town, where the buildings were taller and the streets narrower. It was the perfect place for a trap, and the biker wasn't going to walk into it blind. He slowed his pace, looking around carefully. He had been in situations like this before. Sometimes it was best to play it smart. Where exactly did they take him? The biker asked, his voice calm despite the tension in the air. The girl swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper. To a warehouse. It's near the old docks. I don't know the exact address, but it's by the river. The biker nodded. He had a pretty good idea of where she meant. He had passed that area before, near the edge of the industrial district. The warehouses were old and abandoned, the perfect hideout for people trying to stay off the radar. We're almost there, the biker said, trying to keep the girl calm. He could feel her trembling behind him, and he knew she had to be terrified. But the girl had strength. She had held on for this long, and now they were going to rescue her brother. The motorcycle weaved through the empty streets, making their way toward the docks. The night air was cold, biting at their skin, but the girl didn't mind. Her mind was focused on one thing, her brother. They reached the outskirts of the industrial district, the tall, looming buildings casting long shadows over the narrow streets. The girl pointed to a dark alley on the right. That's it, she whispered. The biker slowed the bike, pulling into the alley. The headlights of the motorcycle illuminated the abandoned buildings ahead, casting an eerie glow. It was too quiet, too still. The biker cut the engine, and the bike rolled to a stop. He motioned for the girl to stay. Close as they dismounted. They couldn't afford to make a sound. The girl's eyes were wide, her heart racing as she followed the biker down the alley. Every step they took seemed to echo in the silence. The biker's senses were on high alert. They were getting closer. He could feel it. His hand moved instinctively to the handle of his knife, ready for whatever was waiting ahead. They reached the corner of the warehouse, where the door was slightly ajar. The girl stopped in her tracks, looking up at the biker. Her voice was barely audible. Please, don't let them hurt him. The biker placed a hand on her shoulder, giving it a reassuring squeeze. We'll get him back, he said firmly. The girl nodded, wiping the tears from her eyes. They moved forward, creeping toward the door. The biker peeked inside, scanning the dark room beyond. The faint sound of voices reached his ears. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He could hear two men talking, their voices low and harsh. He motioned for the girl to stay hidden behind him as he slipped inside. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering bulb hanging above. The boy, no older than 12, was tied to a chair in the center of the room, his head hanging low. His arms were bound tightly, and his face was bruised. The biker's blood boiled at the sight. The men didn't notice him at first. They were too focused on arguing over something. The biker moved quickly, silently. He reached for his knife and stepped toward the two men. What do you think you're doing with that kid? He growled. The men froze, their eyes widening in surprise. Without warning, the biker lunged at the nearest man, knocking him to the ground with one swift motion. The other man scrambled for a gun, but the biker was faster. He disarmed him with ease, tossing the weapon aside. The girl gasped from the doorway, but the biker motioned for her to stay back. He didn't want her to see any more of this violence. The two men were now on the ground, tied up and helpless. The biker moved quickly, cutting the ropes that bound the boy. You're safe now, he said softly. The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with both fear and relief. The biker helped him to his feet and turned to the girl. Let's go. Your brother's safe now. They moved swiftly, the boy stumbling as they made their way back to the motorcycle. The girl stayed close to her brother, her eyes never leaving him. She had a brother to save, and now they were leaving this place behind. The night wasn't over, but they had won this fight. The biker looked back at the abandoned warehouse one last time, making sure no one followed them. Then, with a final glance at the girl and her brother, he kicked the engine back to life, and they sped off into the night, leaving the darkness behind them. The bike roared to life once again, the headlights cutting through the night as the biker and the two children sped down the street, the weight of their rescue still fresh in the air. The road ahead was long, and the danger wasn't over, but for the first time since they started this journey, the biker felt a small sense of relief. The boy, still shaken but no longer bound, sat behind him, his small hands gripping the leather of the biker's jacket. The girl, who had led them to her brother, sat silently, her eyes watching the dark road ahead. She had been through so much, and yet there was a quiet strength in her now. It was as if the promise the biker made to her was beginning to settle in. They had made it out of the warehouse, but the real test was still to come. As the bike weaved through the empty streets, the biker's thoughts raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. The Serpents, the men who had taken the boy, weren't just going to let them go. There would be consequences. They had to get back to safety, fast. But the city was big, and the road ahead was uncertain. "Where are we going?" the girl finally asked, her voice soft but strong. She had been quiet for the whole ride, only speaking when necessary. "We're heading to a safe house," the biker said, his voice steady. "It's a place where you can rest. It's safe. No one will find you there." The girl nodded, but there was doubt in her eyes. She had seen enough of the world to know that safety wasn't always guaranteed. Her mind was still on her brother, on the men who had taken him, and on what might come next. "Thank you," she whispered, almost as if she were speaking to herself. The biker didn't respond right away, but he understood. He wasn't in this for praise. He was here to protect them, and that was enough. But as they turned onto a quiet street, the sound of tires screeching against asphalt cut through the silence. The biker's heart skipped a beat as he glanced in the rearview mirror. A car. No, it wasn't just a car. It was a black SUV, the same one that had been parked near the warehouse. The same one that had taken the boy. They were being followed. The biker's grip tightened around the handlebars, his mind racing. He had known this was coming, but he had hoped they would have more time. They weren't out of the woods yet. "Hold on tight," he said to the children, his voice low and urgent. The girl's eyes widened in fear, but she held on tighter, her small arms wrapping around the biker's waist. The boy, still recovering from the shock, didn't say anything, but his body tensed as the SUV grew closer. The biker's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his focus. He had promised the girl and her brother safety, and he wasn't about to break that promise now. The road ahead was straight, but the SUV was gaining on them. The biker's mind clicked into overdrive. There were no more shortcuts, no more time to waste. He had to get them off the road and into a place where the SUV couldn't follow. He swerved left, taking a sharp turn down an alleyway. The tires screeched again as the SUV followed, but the biker was already 3 steps ahead. He shot through the narrow passage, the sound of the motorcycle's engine echoing off the walls as he turned sharply, guiding the bike into a tight corner. He glanced behind him, seeing the SUV try to follow, but the alley was too narrow. The driver of the SUV slammed on the brakes, the sound of the tires screeching as it came to a halt. The biker had bought them some time, but not enough. The alley was a dead end. They had nowhere else to go. "This is it," the biker muttered. To himself, he pulled the bike to a stop and turned to face the children. "Stay close," he said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. He stood up, his legs moving quickly as he scanned their surroundings. There was no way out of the alley, no easy escape. But he wasn't about to give up. The sound of footsteps echoed from behind them. He turned around to see a group of men in dark clothing, their faces obscured by the shadows. The Serpents. They had found them. The leader of the group stepped forward, his eyes cold and calculating. "You made a mistake coming here," he said, his voice low and threatening. The biker didn't flinch. "You're not taking them," he said, his voice firm. "Not today." The men spread out, blocking any potential escape routes. The biker's hands were steady, his mind clear. He had been in tight spots before, but this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about keeping the children safe. The Serpent leader laughed, a sound that sent chills down the biker's spine. "You think you can protect them?" he sneered. "You're outnumbered. Outmatched." The biker didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had one choice: fight. The moment the leader made a move, the biker lunged forward, knocking him to the ground with a swift strike. The others moved to follow, but the biker was ready. The next few moments were a blur of fists and leather, the sound of bodies hitting the concrete as the biker fought to protect the children. It wasn't easy, but he wasn't about to let anyone harm them. As the last man fell to the ground, the biker took a deep breath. They were safe. For now. But he knew the fight wasn't over. The Serpents would be back. And when they came, he would be ready. The biker stood over the fallen men, his breath coming in heavy bursts as the adrenaline from the fight began to wear off. The alley was silent now, save for the distant hum of city traffic and the faint sound of the kid's nervous breathing behind him. His eyes scanned the surroundings, every muscle in his body tense and ready for whatever came next. The children were safe for now, but he knew that wouldn't last. The Serpents, those ruthless men, would be back. They always came back. He needed to get them somewhere safer, somewhere he could think clearly. He turned back to the girl and her brother. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice firm. The girl nodded, but her eyes were filled with fear, uncertainty. The boy clung to her, his small hands shaking. They had seen enough horror for one night. But the biker wasn't about to let that be their reality forever. He motioned for them to follow as he led them back to his bike. The night was still thick with tension, but the ride would take them to safety, or so he hoped. The sun would rise soon, and with it, new dangers. He could feel the weight of his promise to the girl and her brother pressing on him, heavier than any battle he had faced before. They mounted the bike once again, the engine roaring to life. The road ahead stretched endlessly, but for the first time since this nightmare had begun, the biker allowed himself to believe they might make it through. He took a deep breath, steadying himself for what lay ahead. As the bike sped down the empty streets, the city seemed quieter now, almost still. The buildings loomed over them like silent sentinels, offering little comfort in the face of the dangers they had narrowly escaped. But the biker knew they couldn't stay on the move forever. They had to find a place to lay low, a place to regroup. The safe house was only a few miles away, but every minute felt like an eternity. The girl was silent behind him, her grip tight on his jacket. She was trying to be brave, but he could feel the fear radiating off her. The boy, too, was quiet, his small body still trembling from the ordeal. The biker wanted to promise them everything would be fine, but he couldn't make that promise. Not yet. Not with the serpents out there. He glanced in the rearview mirror, making sure they weren't being followed. He saw nothing. For a moment, he allowed himself to relax just slightly. But then, in the distance, he saw the flashing lights. Sirens. The unmistakable sound of an approaching vehicle. His heart skipped a beat. "Stay low," he ordered, his voice calm but urgent. The girl and her brother complied without question, instinctively pressing themselves against him. The bike sped up, weaving through the streets as the sound of the sirens grew louder. The biker's mind raced. It could be the police, or it could be someone else. Someone much worse. He didn't dare take chances. The sirens were getting closer now, too close. The biker could feel the pressure mounting, every decision a matter of life and death. He turned sharply, cutting down a side street and into a maze of alleyways. The lights behind them flickered, momentarily losing their trace. But the biker didn't stop. He couldn't afford to. He had to shake whatever was chasing them. The alleyways grew darker, more narrow. The bike's engine roared as he navigated the twists and turns. He could hear the sound of tires screeching in the distance, but it wasn't getting closer. Not yet. They had lost them. For now. As they emerged from the maze of alleys, the biker saw the safe house in the distance. A small, inconspicuous building tucked away from the main roads, perfect for staying off the radar. He slowed the bike, his eyes scanning the area. There was no sign of anyone else. No flashing lights, no figures in the distance. They had made it. He parked the bike in the back, hidden from view, and motioned for the children to follow him. The door to the safe house creaked as he opened it, leading them inside. The dim light inside was a welcome sight after the dark streets they had just traversed. The walls were lined with old furniture, and the air smelled faintly of dust. It was nothing fancy, but it was safe. For now, the biker led them to a small room in the back, a quiet space with a few blankets and a table. "You're safe here," he said, his voice softer now. The girl nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also exhaustion. She collapsed onto the floor, her brother beside her. They were safe, but the weight of the night was heavy on their shoulders. The biker watched them for a moment, his mind still racing. They had made it this far, but he knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The serpents would be coming for them, and when they did, the biker would be ready. He would keep his promise, no matter what it took. The morning light crept through the small windows of the safe house, casting long shadows on the floor. The biker sat in the corner, his eyes closed, trying to rest, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. The kids were safe for now, but the threat of the serpents still loomed large in his mind. He had no illusions. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. He glanced at the children, who were still asleep on the floor. The boy, whose name was Jamal, was curled up tightly, his face pale and drawn from the shock. The girl, whose name he still didn't know, had fallen asleep with her head resting on her brother's shoulder, her face still streaked with tears. The biker had promised to protect them, but that promise was becoming harder to keep with every passing minute. The door creaked open, and the biker immediately tensed. He had learned to be alert, always ready for whatever came next. But it was only the girl. She was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Are you okay?" the biker asked softly, his voice gentle. She nodded but didn't speak. The silence stretched between them for a moment before she stepped into the room and sat down next to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For saving us." The biker didn't know what to say. He wasn't here for thanks. He was here to keep them safe, to make sure they didn't become another tragic story. But the gratitude in her eyes was enough to make him feel like he was doing something right. "You don't have to thank me," he said quietly. "I made a promise to your dad. I'm just keeping it." The girl's face faltered for a moment, and the biker could see the pain behind her eyes. Her father had died years ago, and now she was left with only memories and the man who had taken her brother. She had no one else. "How old are you?" the biker asked, trying to keep the conversation light. The girl hesitated, as if she wasn't sure how to answer. "I'm 12, she said finally. "Jamal is 9. The biker nodded. He had a daughter of his own, though she was much older now. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her, living with someone like her stepfather. It was a harsh world, and too many kids had to grow up too quickly. "We're going to stay here until we figure out what to do next," the biker said, his voice firm. "But we can't stay hidden forever. The serpents will come looking for you." The girl's face went pale, and the biker could see the fear in her eyes. She had been through enough already. He couldn't imagine what she was feeling. "Do you think they'll find us here?" she asked, her voice shaking. The biker didn't want to lie to her, but he also didn't want to scare her. "They might," he said honestly. "But I'll be ready, and I won't let them take you." The girl nodded, though the fear didn't leave her eyes. She was trying to be strong, but the weight of the situation was heavy on her. "I won't let them hurt you," the biker promised again. He stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the empty street. The world outside seemed so peaceful, but he knew better. There was danger lurking just around the corner, and they weren't safe yet. His phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled it out and checked the message. It was from one of his brothers in the club. "They're looking for you. They know you took the kids." The biker's stomach dropped. He had been hoping for more time, but it looked like the serpents weren't wasting any. They were coming for them. "We need to leave," the biker said, turning to the children. "Now." The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with panic. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice trembling. The biker didn't have a perfect answer. He wasn't sure where they would go next, but he knew they couldn't stay here. They had to keep moving, keep staying one step ahead. "I know a place," he said, his voice steady. "It's far, but it's safe. We can stay there until we figure this out." He could hear the sound of the motorcycle engine rumbling outside. His brothers were ready, and they were going to make sure the kids were protected. But the road ahead was uncertain. They had no idea what the serpents had planned, but he was prepared to face whatever came their way. The girl stood up, taking her brother's hand. They were ready, or at least as ready as they could be. "Let's go," the biker said, walking toward the door. He didn't look back as he opened it, stepping out into the cool morning air. The sun was rising, and the day ahead would be filled with danger, but also hope. They had made it this far, and he wasn't going to let anything take them away from him now. The biker's heart was pounding as they sped down the empty highway. The engine of the motorcycle hummed beneath him, but there was no comfort in the sound. The children clung to him, their small bodies pressed tightly against his back, their fear palpable in the cool morning air. The girl's grip was stronger now, more desperate. She had seen what the serpents were capable of, and her eyes reflected a fear no child should ever have to endure. The boy, Jamal, was silent, but his trembling hands told the biker everything he needed to know. They were running from danger, but the biker knew there was no escaping it forever. They had to keep moving, keep ahead of the serpents. His brothers in the club had been in contact, warning him of the men's movements. They were relentless. The serpents knew exactly where they were headed. The biker wasn't sure how much time they had left, but he knew they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. He glanced at the rearview mirror, scanning for any sign of trouble. There was nothing yet, but he wouldn't be fooled. The serpents always had a way of tracking their targets. The silence was deafening, the only sounds coming from the rush of the wind and the soft breathing of the children behind him. He could feel the weight of his promise pressing on his chest. He had sworn to protect them, and he wasn't about to fail now. As they approached the outskirts of a small town, the biker felt a sense of unease. This place wasn't on his route, and it didn't feel right. He slowed down, his eyes darting between the street signs and the darkened buildings ahead. It was a quiet town, nothing out of the ordinary, but something in the air felt wrong. The motorcycle slowed as they neared a narrow alley. The biker's instincts were on high alert, and he quickly turned the bike into the alley, pulling up to a hidden corner where they could regroup. He stopped the bike, keeping his engine running just in case they needed to leave in a hurry. The children hopped off, their legs shaky from the ride. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide. "Why are we stopping here?" she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. The biker looked around, scanning the street for any signs of danger. "We need to make sure we're not being followed," he replied. "Stay close to me." He motioned for them to stay by the wall as he moved cautiously toward the end of the alley. The streetlights flickered in the distance, and the town felt too still, too quiet. The biker's hand hovered near the grip of his knife. He wasn't expecting trouble, but he never went into a situation unprepared. As he peered around the corner, a sudden noise caught his attention. Footsteps. The sound of boots hitting the pavement. His pulse quickened. The Serpents had found them. He turned quickly, signaling for the children to stay down. The girl and her brother crouched against the wall, holding their breath. The biker's eyes narrowed as he scanned the street. He could see the figures now, moving slowly, purposefully, like hunters on a prowl. They were coming this way. He motioned for the kids to follow him as he backed into the shadows. They needed to get out of sight. They had to move fast. The biker's mind raced. They couldn't stay hidden here for long. He couldn't let them get trapped. They had one chance to make it out of this alive, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. The footsteps drew closer, and the biker's grip tightened on his knife. He needed to act fast. With one swift motion, he grabbed the kids by the arms and pulled them toward a side door in the alley. It was a small, unmarked door, but it led to a storage area behind a nearby store. It was their only chance. The kids followed closely behind him as he led them through the dark corridor. The door creaked open, and they slipped inside, the cold air of the storage room greeting them like a cold embrace. The biker closed the door behind them, locking it quietly. They were safe for the moment, but the danger was still real. He could hear the Serpents outside, their voices muffled but unmistakable. They were searching. "What are we going to do?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. The biker crouched down, looking at them both. "We wait," he said, his voice low and steady. "We wait until they pass, and then we move again. We'll find a safer place." The children nodded, though their fear hadn't left. The biker sat with his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room, listening for any signs of movement outside. The minutes felt like hours. Every second was another moment of uncertainty. He had to keep them safe. He couldn't fail. They had made it this far, but the road ahead was still filled with danger. The Serpents were relentless, and he knew they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. The biker closed his eyes for a moment, trying to steady his breath. He had faced worse before, but protecting these kids, keeping his promise to their father, was the only thing that mattered now. His hand clenched around the knife. He was ready for whatever came next. The door behind him creaked. The biker's senses went on high alert as he tensed, ready for action. It was too quiet, too still. He couldn't take any chances. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, echoing down the narrow hallway. The biker tensed, his hand gripping the knife tight, eyes scanning every inch of the dark storage room. The children, huddled close behind him, were silent, their wide eyes fixed on the door as they waited for the worst. He could feel their fear, but he had to stay calm. They had made it this far. He couldn't afford to lose them now. Every creak of the old building made his heart race, but he kept his composure. He needed to be their protector, their only hope in a world that seemed bent on tearing them apart. The sound of the footsteps stopped just outside the door. His breath caught in his throat. They were close. Too close. He had no idea how many of them were out there, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about saving the kids anymore. This was about survival. The door handle rattled slightly, and the biker's heart skipped a beat. He gripped the knife harder, ready for whatever was about to happen. The seconds felt like hours. Then, there was a knock. Not A loud, threatening knock, but a steady, almost casual tap. The biker didn't know what to make of it. He motioned for the kids to stay as still as possible, crouching down behind an old stack of crates. His eyes never left the door, his mind racing through every possible scenario. A second knock came, louder this time, and then the voice he had been dreading. "I know you're in there," a man called, his voice low and calm, but laced with authority. "I don't want to hurt you. I just need to talk." The biker's mind raced. Talk? Was he bluffing? Or was this a trap? He wasn't sure, but he wasn't going to take any chances. He stepped quietly toward the back of the room, motioning for the children to follow. "Stay low and stay quiet," he whispered as he checked the back exit. The kids nodded, fear in their eyes, but they trusted him. He was their only lifeline. He peeked through the small, cracked window of the storage room and saw a car parked outside, a black SUV with tinted windows. The same car. The Serpents. He knew they would stop at nothing to find them. He had no idea how much time they had before more men showed up, but he wasn't about to let them catch him off guard. He turned back to the kids, his eyes narrowing. "We need to go? Now," he said, his voice calm but urgent. The girl and her brother didn't hesitate. They knew what was coming. They had to move quickly, or they would be trapped. The biker moved toward the back door, checking it quickly. It wasn't locked, but it creaked as it opened, making him wince. He motioned for the kids to follow and stepped outside into the cool morning air. The city was still asleep, but they didn't have time to enjoy the quiet. They had to keep moving. The biker glanced behind them, making sure no one was following. They had only seconds before the Serpents realized they had escaped. They moved quickly, darting between buildings, staying out of sight. The alleyways were their best bet, narrow and winding, giving them the cover they needed. But as they moved further into the city's underbelly, the biker could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They couldn't keep running forever. They needed a plan. The biker stopped at the end of a dark alley, looking both ways. He had no idea where to go next, but he couldn't risk taking the kids to any of the safe houses he had used in the past. The Serpents had connections everywhere. He couldn't trust anyone. He pulled out his phone, quickly typing a message to his club brothers. "They found us. Need backup. Now." He hit send, slipping the phone back into his pocket. The next few moments felt like an eternity. The only sounds were the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant hum of traffic. The kids were quiet, but he could feel their fear, their anxiety. He had to do something to reassure them. "We're going to be okay," he said, his voice low but firm. "I won't let anything happen to you." The girl looked up at him, her eyes full of doubt, but also trust. "You promise?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The biker hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I promise," he said, his voice unwavering. "Now let's move." He turned, leading them down another alley, deeper into the city. They had no idea where they were going, but they had to keep moving, keep staying ahead of the danger. As they moved through the maze of back streets and alleys, the biker's thoughts kept circling back to the Serpents. He knew they wouldn't stop, not until they had what they wanted. And that meant he couldn't stop either. He had made a promise to the girl's father. He had to keep it. He would do whatever it took to keep her and her brother safe. His brothers in the club were on their way, but it wouldn't be enough. They needed to get out of the city, out of reach. And he was the only one who could make that happen. The biker pushed forward, his heart pounding as he led the children into the unknown, ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about family, loyalty, and the promise he had made to protect them. And he wouldn't let anything break that promise. The alley they were moving through seemed endless, the dark walls closing in on them as they walked, their footsteps muffled by the silence that hung heavily around them. The biker led the way, his senses sharp, his mind alert to every sound and movement. The children followed closely behind, their faces pale and eyes wide with the weight of fear. Every so often, the girl would glance up at him, her trust in him unwavering, though her body trembled with every turn they made. She had seen enough to know the danger was far from over, but the biker had promised her safety, and she was holding on to that promise with everything she had. Jamal, still reeling from the events of the past few hours, walked silently beside his sister. His small hand reached out to hold hers, the only comfort he could offer. He was scared, terrified even, but he wasn't alone. They were together, and as long as they were together, there was hope. The biker didn't speak as they moved through the maze of narrow streets. His mind was racing, running through every possible scenario, planning their next move. He couldn't afford to make a mistake. The serpents were relentless. He had to get them out of the city, but the longer they stayed, the more dangerous it became. There was no guarantee that his club brothers would be able to help them in time. It was up to him now. He led them into a small park, tucked away behind a row of buildings. It was quiet here, the kind of place where people came to escape the noise of the city. But even in this peace, the biker didn't feel safe. He wasn't sure if they were being followed or if the serpents had lost their trail, but he couldn't take any chances. He turned to the children. "Stay close," he said softly. "I'm going to check the area. Don't move." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and trust. She had been through too much to question him now. She just wanted to feel safe, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to believe that they might be. The biker moved quietly, slipping into the shadows of the park. He didn't want to take any risks, not with the children so close. He moved from tree to tree, scanning the area for any signs of danger. There was no movement, but his instincts told him to stay alert. The serpents could strike at any moment. After what felt like an eternity, he returned to the children. "We're safe for now," he said, though he knew this wasn't over. "But we need to keep moving. We can't stay here long." The girl looked up at him, her eyes searching his face. "Where will we go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The biker paused, weighing his options. He could take them to one of his other hideouts, but the serpents had people everywhere. He couldn't risk it. "I know a place," he said finally. "A cabin out in the woods. It's remote. We can stay there until things settle down." The girl nodded, though she still looked uncertain. The boy was silent, his small body pressed against his sister's. "Let's go," the biker said, turning toward the edge of the park. The trees loomed ahead, their shadows stretching long in the fading light. The air was cool, and the world felt strangely quiet. The biker's mind was still racing. He had to get them to the cabin, but he wasn't sure how much longer they could keep running. The serpents would find them. They always did. As they reached the edge of the park, the biker heard something in the distance. A low rumble, like the sound of an engine. His heart skipped a beat. He stopped and motioned for the children to stay still. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears as the sound grew louder. The engine roared, and the biker knew it wasn't just a car. It was the serpents. They had found them. "Run," the biker ordered, his voice low but urgent. "Go. Head for the trees now." The children didn't hesitate. They bolted into the woods, their small feet scrambling over the uneven ground as they tried to keep up with the biker. The sound of the engine grew louder, closer. The serpents weren't far behind. The biker's legs pumped faster, his heart thundering in his chest. He had to get the kids to safety. The trees grew thicker ahead, their branches hanging low and casting dark shadows across their path. The biker pushed forward, glancing over his shoulder. He could see the headlights of the SUV cutting through the darkness. They were closing in. The biker cursed under his breath and pushed himself harder. The trees began to thin out, and he saw it. A small cabin, nestled in a clearing, just ahead. It was a modest place, hidden from the world, just the kind of place they needed. "Almost there," he yelled back to the children. "Keep going." The girl was the first to reach the cabin, her small body shaking with exhaustion and fear. The biker followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the darkness one last time before he slammed the door shut behind them. They were inside. For now. But the threat wasn't over. The biker didn't even have time to catch his breath before the sound of the engine grew louder again. The serpents were almost there. "We need to lock up," the biker said, rushing to the door. "Get in the back now. Stay quiet." The children nodded, their faces pale but determined. They had come this far. They couldn't stop now. As the biker hurried to secure the cabin, the sound of the approaching SUV echoed in the distance. They were running out of time. The biker glanced over at the kids, his expression hardening. "Stay low. Stay silent." The silence in the cabin was deafening. The children huddled in the corner, their eyes wide with fear, as the biker quickly moved to secure the door. He could hear the rumbling of the SUV in the distance, the sound growing louder with each passing second. The serpents were almost here. His heart raced as he checked the window, his eyes scanning the dark trees surrounding the cabin. There was no way out, no easy escape. The only option was to wait. He turned back to the children, his expression hard but calm. "Stay here. Don't make a sound." The girl nodded silently, clutching her brother close to her. Jamal's eyes were wide, his small body trembling as he leaned against his sister. The biker's mind raced, thinking of every possible way the Serpents could try to get in. They were professionals, ruthless, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. He reached for the small arsenal of weapons hidden in the cabin, a few pistols, a rifle, and a handful of ammunition. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. He didn't plan on going down without a fight. His eyes flicked to the children again. They were safe for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the Serpents would stop at nothing to tear them apart. He needed to keep them alive, and that meant he had to think fast. He quickly moved to the back door and checked it, making sure it was locked and bolted shut. The last thing he needed was for the Serpents to catch him off guard. The rumbling of the SUV was getting closer. He could hear the tires crunching on the gravel road, and the headlights were now visible through the cracks in the window. They were almost there. He glanced over at the children once more, his gaze softening. He couldn't protect them forever. This was the moment of truth. If they were going to survive, they had to move quickly. He grabbed his phone, quickly typing out a message to his club brothers. "They found us. We need backup now." He hit send, but there was no time to wait for a response. He had to act fast. The sound of the SUV coming to a stop outside sent a chill down his spine. He moved to the side of the cabin, peeking through the curtains. The black SUV was parked just outside, its headlights blinding in the dark. He could see the figures inside, but they hadn't gotten out yet. His breath caught in his throat. They were waiting for something. The biker didn't have time to wonder what. He turned to the children, his face grim. "We're leaving," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Follow me, and stay quiet." The girl nodded, her face pale but determined. Jamal followed closely behind her as they crept toward the back of the cabin. The biker motioned for them to stay low and move toward the back door. He opened it slowly, trying not to make a sound, and stepped into the cold night air. The ground was soft beneath his boots, and the night was eerily quiet. He could hear the distant sound of the SUV's engine, the only noise breaking the silence. The cabin was surrounded by trees, the shadows deep and ominous. They had to make it to the road, but the woods were thick, and the Serpents would be looking for them. They had no time to waste. "Stay close," the biker whispered, his eyes scanning the dark trees around them. The children stayed close, their small bodies trembling as they moved through the woods. The biker's mind was racing, but he couldn't afford to panic. They had to keep moving. The sound of the SUV starting up again sent a surge of adrenaline through his body. He had no idea if the Serpents were getting closer or if they were just waiting for the right moment to strike, but he couldn't wait to find out. They had to keep moving. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, the path winding through thick underbrush. The biker could hear the kids' footsteps behind him, their breathing shallow with fear. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Every minute counted. He pushed forward, the cold air biting at his skin. The road was close now, just up ahead. He could see the faint outline of the streetlights in the distance. He had to make it there before the Serpents found them. His heart raced, his muscles aching from the effort of moving so quickly through the woods. The children were slowing down now, their energy drained from the fear and exhaustion. He turned back to them. "We're almost there," he said, his voice firm, but filled with urgency. The girl nodded, but Jamal was lagging behind. The biker reached out a hand, pulling him close. "Come on, buddy," he urged, his voice gentle but commanding. "We have to move. We'll be safe soon." They pushed forward, the road getting closer with every step. The trees finally began to thin, and the biker could see the road clearly now, the headlights of cars passing in the distance. They were close, but just as he thought they were in the clear, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind them. The Serpents. They had found them. "Run," the biker ordered, his voice low but forceful. The kids didn't hesitate. They bolted forward, their small legs carrying them as fast as they could go. The biker turned, his heart pounding as he prepared for whatever came next. They were almost at the road, but he knew they wouldn't make it without a fight. The biker's heart raced as he looked over his shoulder, seeing the shadows of the Serpents moving closer, their footsteps getting louder. The kids were running ahead, but he knew they wouldn't make it to the road without help. He sprinted forward, catching up with the children, his mind focused solely on keeping them safe. The girl was ahead, her legs moving fast, her breath coming in short. Panicked bursts. Jamal was lagging behind, stumbling slightly. The biker reached out, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward, his voice urgent but steady. "Come on, buddy. We're almost there." Jamal nodded, but the fear in his eyes was unmistakable. The biker could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The serpents were closing in, and they had no time left. As they neared the road, the biker could see the headlights of a car in the distance, a small beacon of hope in the otherwise dark landscape. But the SUV was still behind them, moving quickly through the woods. He could hear the engine growling, its headlights cutting through the trees like a predator closing in on its prey. The biker pushed the children forward, urging them to move faster. "We need to get to the road now," he shouted. But just as they were within feet of the road, a shout rang out behind them. "Stop right there." The biker spun around, his hand reaching for the gun tucked at his waist. The serpents were here. They had caught up. There were 4 of them, their figures emerging from the trees like ghosts. The biker's eyes locked onto the leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek. He had seen him before. The serpents were known for their ruthlessness, but this man, he was different. "You're not going anywhere," the leader said, his voice low and dangerous. The biker stepped in front of the children, positioning himself between them and the approaching men. His hand stayed close to his sidearm, ready for whatever came next. "Leave them alone," the biker said, his voice calm but firm. "I won't let you take them." The leader laughed, a cold, mocking sound that echoed in the stillness of the woods. "You think you can stop us? You've made a mistake, my friend. And now, you're going to pay for it." The biker's muscles tensed, his eyes scanning the 4 men. They were closing in, circling him, but he wasn't backing down. He couldn't. He had made a promise, and he would do whatever it took to keep it. The girl and Jamal huddled behind him, their fear palpable, but they trusted him. They had to. The biker took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the leader's. "I'm not afraid of you," he said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "You'll have to go through me first." The leader's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, everything went silent. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. Then, without warning, one of the serpents lunged at the biker. He dodged to the side, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it, disarming him with practiced ease. The other men moved in, but the biker was faster. He kicked one of them in the chest, sending him stumbling backward into a tree. He could hear the sound of footsteps behind him. The children were running for the road. "Go! Get to the car!" the biker shouted, his voice urgent. The girl hesitated for a moment, but Jamal grabbed her hand, pulling her forward. They were almost there. The leader growled in frustration, drawing a knife from his belt. "You think you can protect them?" he sneered, stepping closer. The biker didn't hesitate. He reached for his gun, pulling it from its holster in one smooth motion. The sound of the safety clicking off seemed impossibly loud in the stillness of the night. The leader stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide with shock. "I don't want to hurt you," the biker said, his voice low and steady. "But I will if I have to." The leader's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. He knew he couldn't win this fight. Not against someone who was willing to do whatever it took to protect the kids. The other serpents, seeing the standoff, began to back off. The leader's eyes flicked between the biker and the road where the children were now running toward the car. He cursed under his breath, realizing that they had lost. "This isn't over," the leader growled, stepping back into the trees. "We'll find you again." The biker didn't answer. He watched the man disappear into the shadows, his grip tightening on the gun. Only when the sound of the leader's footsteps faded did he lower the weapon. His heart was still pounding in his chest, but for the moment, they were safe. He turned and ran toward the road, where the children were waiting by the car, breathless and scared, but alive. He rushed to them, pulling the door open. "Get in. Now," he said, his voice sharp. The children didn't hesitate this time. They scrambled into the car, and the biker followed, slamming the door shut behind him. He started the engine, the sound of the car roaring to life as they sped down the road. The woods behind them grew distant, the danger they had just faced fading with every mile. But the biker knew it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The serpents would be back, and he had to be ready. He glanced at the children in the rearview mirror. They were shaken, their faces pale, but they were alive. They had made it. For now, that was enough. The car sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness as the biker kept his eyes on the rearview mirror. The tension in the air was thick, every mile bringing them further from the immediate danger but closer to the next one. The children were silent in the back seat, their bodies exhausted from the long night, their faces pale but still filled with relief. The girl had her head against the window, her eyes half closed as she tried to rest, while Jamal clutched her hand tightly, his small fingers trembling. The biker's grip on the steering wheel was firm, his mind still racing. He had to get them out of the city, as far away as possible. But even though the Serpents had been left behind for now, he knew they wouldn't stop. They never did. He could already hear the sound of the engines in his mind, feel the weight of his promise to the girl and her brother pressing on him. He had to protect them. The road ahead stretched on, dark and empty, the occasional passing car the only sign of life. The biker's eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror once again. No lights, no sign of pursuit. For now, they were safe. He let out a long breath, the first time he'd allowed himself to relax since the encounter in the woods. But the relief was short-lived. He couldn't stop now. The kids needed him to keep going. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady, though the exhaustion was starting to creep in. He glanced at the girl and her brother. They didn't speak, but he saw the look of silent gratitude in their eyes. They were trusting him, and that was a responsibility he didn't take lightly. He couldn't fail them. After another hour of driving, the biker finally pulled off the main road and onto a small, gravel path leading into the woods. The trees were thick here, the air cooler, the surroundings quieter. It was a place he had used before, a cabin tucked away in the woods, far enough from the city to be safe, but close enough for him to reach when needed. As the car bumped along the path, the biker's eyes darted around, scanning the area for any sign of danger. He couldn't help it. He had to be vigilant. He had no idea how much time they had before the Serpents came looking for them again. The path eventually opened up into a clearing, and the biker could see the cabin ahead, a small, modest structure hidden among the trees. He pulled up to the front and stopped the car, leaving the engine running for just a moment. He looked at the children in the back seat, his gaze softening. "We're here. This is as safe as it gets for now." The girl slowly opened her eyes, looking at the cabin with uncertainty. "Is this really safe?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker nodded, his expression resolute. "It's as safe as we can be. We'll stay here for a while, lay low, and figure out our next move." He got out of the car, moving to the trunk to grab a small duffel bag with supplies. The girl and Jamal climbed out, their legs shaky as they followed him up the front steps. The door creaked as the biker opened it, stepping inside. The cabin was simple, nothing more than a few chairs, a small kitchen, and a wood-burning stove. It was far from comfortable, but it would do. The walls were lined with old, weathered wood, and the air smelled faintly of pine. It was a place to hide, to breathe, to rest. The girl looked around, her eyes wary, but she didn't say anything. She just sat down on one of the chairs, her brother close by her side. The biker locked the door behind them and moved to the small window, peering out through the blinds. The trees outside seemed to stretch forever, offering some measure of peace, but the biker knew it was an illusion. He had seen enough of this world to know that peace didn't last. Not for people like him. Not for people like the children. He took a deep breath and turned back to the room. The children needed rest, but so did he. They had been running, fighting, surviving, and now it was time to plan. But as he looked at them, the weight of the situation hit him hard. He had made a promise to their father to protect them. He hadn't failed yet, but he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not for a second. "I'm going to set up a few things," the biker said, breaking the silence. "You two get some rest. We'll need our strength for what's coming." The girl nodded, her eyes heavy with fatigue. She pulled her brother close, resting her head on his shoulder as they both leaned back in the chair. The biker moved to the small desk in the corner, pulling out a map and a notebook. He spread the map out on the table, his eyes scanning it for their next move. He needed to get them to a place where they would be safe, but he wasn't sure where that was yet. The city was too close, and the Serpents had eyes everywhere. As he traced his finger over the map, he heard a rustling sound behind him. He turned quickly, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun, but it was only the girl. She was standing in the doorway, looking at him with a determined expression. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice strong despite the exhaustion. The biker paused, surprised by the question. She was scared, yes, but she wasn't giving up. We lay low for now, he said, turning back to the map. We wait for the right moment, then we move. The girl nodded, her eyes not leaving him. We'll be ready, she said quietly. The biker met her gaze, his heart heavy with the responsibility he had taken on. He couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not when they were so close to safety. The cabin was quiet now, the only sound being the crackling of the wood burning in the stove. The biker sat at the table, his mind still racing, trying to figure out their next move. The children were resting, trying to recover from the long night. He could feel the weight of his promise to their father pressing on him. He couldn't fail them. He had to keep them safe, no matter what. He glanced at the window, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. They had been here for a few hours, but it felt like days. Time was slipping away, and the serpents wouldn't rest until they had what they wanted. The biker took a deep breath, standing up and walking to the small window. The woods outside were still, peaceful even, but he knew better. The peace would not last. The serpents would come. They always came. He ran his hand over his face, trying to clear his mind. They needed to move, to get out of here, but where? He needed to be strategic. They couldn't just run and hope for the best. They needed a plan. He turned back to the table, spreading out the map. He had a few safe houses, but they were too close to the city. The serpents could easily track them there. He couldn't risk it. He needed to find a place farther out, somewhere isolated, but still within reach. As he traced his finger over the map, the sound of footsteps behind him caught his attention. He turned to see the girl standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with determination. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. The biker felt a surge of pride. She was scared, he knew that, but she wasn't backing down. She wanted to fight. She was stronger than she gave herself credit for. "We need to keep moving," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We can't stay here long. The serpents are going to come for us, and we need to be ready." The girl nodded, her jaw set in determination. "We'll be ready," she said quietly. The biker's heart swelled with pride. He couldn't fail them. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. He looked back at the map, his finger tracing the route. "There's a place about 70 miles north of here," he said, his voice low. "It's isolated, but it's a safe house. We'll stay there for a while, lay low." The girl nodded again. "What about Jamal?" she asked, her voice soft. The biker turned to look at Jamal, who had fallen asleep on the chair in the corner. He hadn't said much, but he was clearly exhausted. "He'll be fine," the biker said, his voice reassuring. "We'll keep him safe." The girl walked over to her brother, gently shaking him awake. "Jamal," she said quietly, her voice soft but firm. "We're moving. We need to get ready." Jamal slowly opened his eyes, his small face groggy and confused. He looked up at his sister, then at the biker. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice small. "We're going to be safe," the biker said, his voice calm but firm. "But we need to move quickly." The girl nodded, helping Jamal to his feet. He was still a little wobbly, but he managed to stand, holding on to his sister for support. The biker grabbed the duffel bag from the corner, stuffing it with supplies. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He could see the fear in the children's eyes, but they were stronger than they realized. They had been through so much, but they were still standing. That gave him hope. He wasn't going to let them down. "We leave in 5 minutes," the biker said, his voice steady. "Get your things together." The girl nodded, taking Jamal's hand as they gathered their belongings. The biker stood by the door, his eyes scanning the woods outside. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about keeping a promise. And he would keep it, no matter the cost. The door creaked as the girl and Jamal moved toward him, their small steps hesitant but determined. The biker opened the door, stepping out into the cool morning air. The woods were still quiet, the trees casting long shadows in the early light. It felt peaceful, but he knew better. The serpents would be looking for them, and they wouldn't stop until they had them. The biker glanced back at the cabin, then at the children. He had no time to waste. They needed to keep moving. "Stay close," he said, his voice low but firm. The girl nodded, taking her brother's hand as they stepped into the woods. The biker moved ahead, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. The serpents wouldn't give up. They never did. But the biker wasn't about to let them win. Not today. Not ever. The forest was still as they made their way through the dense underbrush, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick leaves on the ground. The sky above was a dull gray, the clouds hanging low, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The biker's eyes scanned the surroundings, his senses heightened. They had been moving for hours, but it felt like they were still in the same place, lost, uncertain, and constantly on edge. The children walked silently behind him, their exhaustion clear on their faces. He could feel the weight of the promise pressing on him. The promise to keep them safe, to protect them from a world that was cruel and unforgiving. He couldn't afford to fail them. Not now, not when they were so close to escaping. The road ahead was uncertain. He had no clear plan, no solid backup. But he had to keep them moving. There was no turning back. Every sound in the forest made his heart race. The serpents could be anywhere, and the biker knew they were getting closer. They always did. The girl looked up at him, her face still pale, but her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. She had become stronger in the past few days, but the fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. "Are we safe yet?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The biker didn't answer immediately. He couldn't promise her safety, not with the serpents still hunting them. "Not yet," he said, his voice low and steady. "But we're getting closer." The girl nodded, her hand tightening around her brother's. Jamal had fallen asleep against her, his small body trembling with exhaustion. The biker didn't know how much longer they could keep running, but they had to keep going. They had to survive. The trees began to thin as they approached the edge of the forest. The biker stopped, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. In the distance, he could see a small town, a sign of civilization. It was the first sign of hope they had seen in days. But it was also dangerous. The serpents had people everywhere. He had to be careful. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice sharp with urgency. The girl nodded again, her expression serious. She had learned to trust him, and he wasn't about to let her down. They moved toward the town, the biker keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. As they neared the edge of the forest, the town's outline became clearer. It was small, a quiet place where people went to escape the chaos of the world. But the biker knew better. There was no such thing as safety when you were on the run. The sound of an engine revving in the distance made his heart skip a beat. The serpents were close. They had to hurry. The biker turned to the children. "We need to move fast," he said. "We're going to get to that town, find somewhere to hide, and figure out what to do next." The girl looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and trust. She didn't say anything, but her grip on Jamal's hand tightened, her determination clear. They began to walk faster, the town now just within reach. The biker stayed close, his hand resting on the gun at his waist, ready for anything. As they reached the outskirts of the town, the biker felt a sudden sense of unease. Something wasn't right. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck standing up. The sound of the engine had stopped. The serpents were here. The biker turned, his eyes scanning the streets. He could see the figures now, moving silently through the shadows. They were closing in. He turned to the girl and Jamal. "Go," he said. "Run. I'll hold them off." The girl hesitated, but the biker didn't give her a choice. "Go now," he shouted, his voice urgent. She grabbed Jamal's hand, pulling him into the alley between two buildings. The biker stood his ground, his eyes locked on the approaching figures. The serpents had found them again. But this time, he was ready. As the first man stepped into the light, the biker moved, his body a blur of motion as he tackled him to the ground. The others were close behind, but he was faster. He knocked another man off balance, sending him crashing into the side of a building. He could hear the footsteps of the children running further into the town, but he didn't take his eyes off the men. "Stay back," he warned, his voice cold and firm. The leader of the serpents stepped forward, a cruel smile on his face. "You're good," he said, his voice laced with amusement. "But you're not good enough." The biker didn't say anything. He didn't need to. His body was already moving, his fist connecting with the leader's jaw in a flash of pain. The leader staggered back, but he wasn't down yet. The biker grabbed the leader's arm, twisting it behind his back with a sharp crack. "This ends now," the biker growled, his voice low and steady. The leader winced in pain, but managed to break free, stumbling backward. "You can't protect them forever," the leader spat, his face twisted with anger. The biker stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "I don't need forever," he said. "I just need today." The leader lunged again, but the biker was faster, disarming him with a quick twist of his wrist. The man fell to the ground with a grunt, defeated. The others were already backing off, realizing they were no match for the biker. They turned and fled into the night, their voices echoing in the distance. The biker stood over the fallen men, his chest heaving with exhaustion. It was over, for now. He turned and ran toward the alley, where the children were waiting. They were safe, for now, but the road ahead was still uncertain. The Serpents would be back, and when they came, the biker would be ready. The girl and Jamal were safe for now, but he wasn't done yet. He wouldn't stop until they were truly free.